Hey guys, welcome back to the Brik House. Brik Stefani here, and today we got what I'm calling the Pokémon Unite excuse tier list. So let's be honest, if you played Pokémon Unite, you've probably used a couple excuses on why you've lost the game. From excuses from having some lag to deal with, selecting the incorrect build, to even your team just being bad. So I think it would be fun to rank all of the most common excuses that you see in Pokémon Unite and largely most MOBAs in general, and rank them amongst each other to see which one is the best and which one is the worst and you should probably avoid in the future. Now, disclaimer, I have most definitely used every one of these excuses at some point, from the best excuse to the worst excuse, so I'm just throwing it out there before I get called out. I have indeed used every single one of these excuses when I have lost a game of Unite, but let me know down in the comments how many of these excuses that you've used, if any. Again, I've probably used like all of these excuses at some point. I mean, we just play a bunch of games to Unite. I mean, it's not always your fault, right? Like, sometimes it's someone else's fault, right? So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support the Brik House. And without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first excuse that we got is the bad ban excuse, and originally this was one of the excuses I was actually going to be putting near the top of the good excuse. However, this was when the Rayquaza ban system had the bottom two players ban the Pokemon. It's since been changed when Groudon was released that all players now have a chance on banning a Pokemon, and it's making it more likely for these OP picks like Pawmot or Empoleon to not make it through that banning phase, and it's making it so it's more of a mid to bad excuse. Still something that can affect you in your game if someone does still, choose to ban like a Sableye or nothing at all, but definitely not going to be that make or break. So the next excuse that we have is that the enemy is playing a broken Pokemon. Now, this is one of those, I gotta say, kind of a bad excuse. There's a lot of broken Pokemon currently in the game, and it's not as much as that they're playing a broken Pokemon as much as they know how to play the broken Pokemon. And so, you can't just play Pawmot and expect to win every single game. You gotta still understand why Pawmot is strong and when to engage to get the full value out of this Pokemon. Then you'll find yourself winning a lot of games. But if you're losing a game and you're saying, oh, Darkrai's broken, therefore I lost, there's something else on why you probably lost that game, and it's not because the enemy's playing a, quote, broken Pokemon. So, next excuse that we got is Groudon is OP. And honestly, this is one of those kind of bad excuses. With Groudon just being such an important objective, obviously at that 2-minute mark, it's going to be fighting around that Groudon. And Pokemon that do very well in that Groudon fight are definitely a lot better in this current meta than a lot of other Pokemon. So as long as this mechanic is in the game, it does make for a decent excuse, although it's something that you do have to, always be aware of when playing a game like Pokemon Unite. So something that just doesn't consistently hold up, and only slightly worse, I would have to say, than blaming a broken Pokemon. This would be, I would say, a mid excuse if this was the Rayquaza, although Groudon is a lot more balanced right now, and so it's not as much as a blaming factor on why you actually lost that game. So next we have the bad support, and it has to do when you blame your support for taking the KOs or taking all the farm, making it so you can't stack, for instance. And again, one of those excuses is gonna have to go into the bad excuse. Honestly, one of the worst excuses you can have. It really is one of those excuses where it's like, well, then just get good. If you're having problems with your support taking your farm or taking your KOs, you might actually need to get better at getting those last hits and ensuring you're getting those KOs and not just letting it up to the wind. Being very certain about things in this game instead of leaving it up to chance, you'll find yourself winning a lot more. Instances like just leaving the farm up to an auto attack instead of using one of your abilities or any of your empowered auto attacks to confirm it, you can just find yourself giving up a lot of KOs and farm to the support when really you should be getting that yourself. So the next excuse that we got is the bad team comp excuse, and I gotta say, this is actually kind of one of the better excuses, definitely the best excuse that we got so far. Team composition in a game like this is definitely something that is very important. If you like, just go into a solo queue game and you got 4 randoms all locking in attackers, there's really not much you can do in that game. Even if they are all gold badge and really good at those respective Pokemon, there's just no guarantee that you're gonna perform, and a team composition like that is just leaving it up to a dice flip whether or not you're gonna win the game or not. So definitely a pretty good excuse, I gotta say. So the next excuse that we got is the team is refusing to group excuse, and I gotta say, another pretty good excuse. I would have to say is around the bad composition excuse. Having a team that doesn't group is very frustrating, and it can mentally take you out of a game knowing that there's objectives up that your team is just not grouping for, having most of your goal zones down because your team just didn't defend for some reason, or even the worst, just going against what seems to be the most coordinated group against your most uncoordinated group, and proceeding to get slammed for the next 10 minutes. So definitely a pretty good excuse, putting it up there on the good excuses, and one that is definitely culpable for the reason why you lost your game. So the next excuse that we got is the no KOs excuse. Now this is one excuse that usually is for if you are stacking either the Drive Lens or the Accel Bracer, something that does require on getting a lot of those early KOs to get going. The solution most of the time is just like with the bad support, get good. You're gonna need to get, if you're gonna be stacking KOs consistently, you're gonna have to find a consistent way to stack KOs and just not leave it up to chance and have your games kind of rely on a coin flip 50-50 chance. Being said, there are times where you can get camped if the enemy has good awareness on which Pokemon might be stacking on the enemy team, and so they shut them down early on in the game. It's something that can definitely happen to you, and something you do have to actually be a bit careful of if you are going to be going some stacking items. It is one of the weaker excuses. It is the solution for this one, for the most part, is get good. So the next excuse that we got is the lag excuse, and lagging or having high ping is honestly a pretty good excuse. Playing some specific Pokemon and not knowing that you're going to be going into a game where you might have high ping is something that can take you by surprise and dramatically affect your performance. Something that you definitely have to be careful of when playing Pokemon like Zoroark, for instance, who are very high ping demanding Pokemon. So far, our best excuse that you can have, if you consistently do good and you have a game where you do pretty bad inexplicably, lag can honestly be a good reason for a lot of people to be like, yeah, that makes sense, they're usually better than this. That does make sense, but they got lag. Now, you gotta be careful because you cannot blame every single game on lag. You're only allowed a couple lag excuses before it's like, well, that's just your situation, right? Lag is something that happens once in a while, so you're not used to it. But if you're used to the lag, that's just normal for you. So it's not really much of an excuse if you're going to be using it 5, 6, 7 times in a row. At that point, it does become one of the weaker excuses. So the next one that we got is our team has poor communication. And one that you might think is a good excuse, but honestly is actually one of the more mid excuses. Now, the reasoning behind this is that since most people do play in solo queue instead of 5s, it's very common for you to have limited communication with your teammates, and the hardest part about playing a MOBA is the fact that you're going to be dealing with people who are going to be doing different decisions and having different priorities during the game. Not everybody's going to be thinking exactly like you are, right? So sometimes you might be doing the best decision, but because that communication is not easy in these types of games, your team doesn't react properly, and it does result in maybe a loss, in maybe you getting KO'd or even a lost game. And the reason why this is just a mid excuse is because this is something that the other team is probably going through as well. There may be other instances where there are certain matchmaking reasons why the other team is better at grouping up than your team, but for the most part, Most people who are playing the game are not in communication with each other and are strictly reacting to how they see others are on the map. And so blaming the fact that you're not able to communicate well isn't exactly the most valid excuse, since everybody is on the same playing field at that point. So now the next excuse is possibly my favorite excuse, the "my team is bad" excuse. Now, it's honestly a pretty bad excuse. It's gonna go at the top of the bad excuse tier for right now. And it's so generic, but it's something that is repeated by probably 90%, if not 100% of the player base. At one point you have complained that everybody on your team was bad except for you, but for some reason everybody on the other team, they're all smart, and you're against 5 smart people and you're the only smart guy on your team. Pokémon Unite has a huge variety of players, from people who've just started playing MOBAs to experts, and compounding that with the matchmaking currently in the game, you're definitely going to find your fair share of bad teams that you're going to be on. Again, it's something that everybody is going to be going through if they're going to be doing solo queue and Unite. You're going to have your fair share of bad teams, and part of the game is, can you carry? How well can you carry these people? Are you supporting well enough? Are you defending well enough? Are you in the attacking role well enough? A lot of it comes down to your individual play, not so much as your team's play. So the next excuse that we got is the smurfing excuse. And honestly, smurfing, or the enemy team is creeping, other variations of this are, you're fairly confident you're going up against a 5-man even though you're in a solo queue. There are ways you can kind of play the system to influence it to get in with your friends. So something that can definitely happen. For the most part, it is a bit hard to prove if you are up against somebody who is kind of taking you for a ride, taking your entire team for a ride and just running over the competition on an alternate account. And it's something I gotta say I'm a bit guilty of too. We do have a separate account that we do hop on, and sometimes we get a lot of KOs on that account, and I do feel a bit bad when we do so. So something that is definitely a bit unfair for lower level players, although a good enough excuse to be a reason why you lost the game. So the next excuse that we got is the toxic team excuse, and we're gonna have to put toxic team in the mid excuse category. It is a good reason on why you could lose a game. You have somebody, spamming the thanks ping over and over again, or just being a complete nuisance. Maybe they are on a losing streak and they decided to just take it out on you guys for one reason or another. Hopefully you don't run into the toxic duo, because that is just a nightmare to play with. Although for the most part, a lot of it is ignoring them. There are definitely times where they're gonna completely throw the game. Although you do gotta remember that the other team might also have a toxic player on their team. They have an equally as high chance of having a toxic player on their team. And sometimes when you get like a 20 KO game, the other team actually has a troll on their team who is completely ruining everything for them. And you just can't see it because you're not on their side and you can't see the cameras. So it's something that is easier to see when you have the toxic team, but not so easy when the enemy has the toxic team. And so now we get to possibly the worst excuse you can make. One that I do tend to make when I lose a game that I feel is just very close, and I'll say we just got unlucky. That's really not the case. This is, for the most part, this is not a luck-based game, it's a strategy-based game. So getting unlucky really just means there was a previous moment that happened that caused you guys to lose, for instance. There was a cause and effect in this situation. It wasn't just by chance you lost by 1,000 points. Sometimes, engaging in a team fight a little bit too soon, or even just not having everybody there for that defense that's very vital at that last 30 seconds could be the make or break of a game. And not so much that you just got unlucky. So again, an excuse that I do tend to make a lot. One that doesn't actually examine what went wrong in that game and what could be improved on. And one that honestly I would try and avoid making in the future. So the next excuse that we got is the wrong items excuse. And this excuse is pretty mid. it is one of a more noob excuse, I would have to say, to be honest. It is common to not know what specific items to run on a Pokemon. Although once you play around like 100, 200 games with a specific Pokemon, you tend to remember exactly what your items that you do use on that Pokemon are. But if you're only like, 50 games in, 20 games in, there is a good chance that you might get a bit confused or put on the wrong items that aren't that good. It has much more to do with experience and just making sure you're on top of it before the game starts, in comparison to some of these other excuses that might be thrown out. And one of the more easier ones to fix, definitely one that's more user error. So the next excuse that we got is you targeted the wrong Pokemon. And I gotta say, it's pretty up there for the mid excuses. It's honestly right above poor communication, I have to say. Honestly, very easy to do in Pokemon Unite. In a lot of other MOBAs, it is a lot this would be a lot worse of an excuse, but because the auto attack system in Unite is a bit confusing, and it does require you to go into your menus to turn on like the advanced attacking, and then even going as far as turning on the wheel to make sure you're attacking the specific Pokemon that you want to, is a lot to keep track of, and something that's very hard to do, especially when playing with a controller. And you'll find a lot of people just straight up not even play with the wheel on, because it actually makes it harder to auto attack the Pokemon that you were trying to auto attack. So the fact that you gotta go into the menus makes it a bit more difficult. And Pokemon Unite, with its auto attack system locking onto Pokemon, for the most part, I find myself not wanting to attack those specific Pokemon. It does make it a better excuse, but still something that everybody is for the most part dealing with in this game. So not something that you can say is the make or break. Team fights can go very fast, a lot can happen, and you can find yourself targeting the wrong Pokemon. So just take a deep breath, go a bit slower in some of these team fights, and just make sure that you're hitting the right Pokemon and you're not just throwing out your moves. So the last excuse that we have, and I gotta say is the best excuse, is that you got an AFK on your team. Now this is possibly the perfect excuse to have. Not only do you not lose points at all, so there is no harm, no foul on having an AFK, but the bots in this game are just very bad. They're very clueless and, well, most often just run into the enemy team and just completely start beating them, while you pray that they're not beating somebody with like an Accel Bracer or a Drive Lens, just compounding that lead they're gonna have. It is 100% possible to win with an AFK, which just makes it feel so much better. But if you're gonna lose a 5v4 game, nobody's gonna bat an eye. Everybody's gonna be like, yeah, you lost a 5v4 game. You tried your hardest. Like, what did you want? What did you want? It was a 5v4. What do you want from me? So having an AFK, by far the best excuse you could possibly have. Lagging in your game, pretty good runner-up as an excuse. It's something that can definitely only be used just a few times, something you can't overuse, or it just becomes kind of just, well, that's just how your game runs. So, and again, by far the worst excuse gotta be, we got unlucky. It tells you nothing. It doesn't explain anything about why you lost the game, and really just a cop-out excuse for not explaining what could have been done better. But let me know, how many of these excuses have you used in your games? Do you agree or disagree with the placement? Do you think that maybe some of these excuses are a little bit more valid than the other? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to know. I've been Brik Stefani. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support the Brik House. And until next time, stay nasty. Yeah, holla back, Brik.